Suzanne Hamilton. This is my series Unseen Landscapes. This is work that I began in 2020. I was looking for a way to talk about landscape and local landscape. And I'd also been interested in gardens for quite a period of time because they're really interesting spaces in that you can see nature, but as soon as you see something organized or arranged, you sort of automatically make an association of people. And that's sort of how we have a relationship with nature, is it's not just completely wild, as we tend to intersect with it in an interesting way. So I sort of started with collecting photos when I'm commuting, which I mostly do by walking, and I sort of have had the same route for quite a number of years. So about the edge of Vic West Esquimalt to about Upper 4th Street, and so I'm passing through a bit of an interesting neighborhood. And before that time, if I was wanting to, say, get source material, I was just interested in the nature. But I started to realize that the story was more interesting if I also looked at the urban along with it, because it's really not separate from nature. And I thought that was the more interesting story. So I started with taking photos with that in mind, and was sort of working through some drawings, the idea being to do paintings. And I'd already decided on a square format, because I like the square format for several reasons. The square format, there's no time in a square, so a portrait, time kind of moves this way. It's naturally how we look at that format, and in landscape you tend to look this way, but in a square it's a little bit more democratic, and so it kind of creates an interesting space, and you kind of create a different narrative. And not only that, but you're also playing with how do you do the composition so that it equally is strong and it's not dominating one way or the other way. So the square format was interesting. And the more I was doing, the more fascinating I was finding these spaces. So I was learning a lot about it. Things can change so much just based on time of day or season or weather that honestly, I was finding I'd photograph the same spaces over, thinking I didn't have a photo of it already, but they just become interesting. And like garden spaces, you can think it's all planned and arranged, but things are constantly growing and changing, and we don't always know how that's happening. And so in a way, by sort of capturing those photographs and then working them up into drawings, I was just coming to discover more about the spaces. And just sheer to the volume that I was doing with the small little square ones that I was doing, which I'll show you in just a moment. Eventually what I ended up with was over 100 of them, just to start with. And they sort of become like a composite of the Victorian landscape. Because even if I know where those spaces are, or somebody else looking at them might know where they are, for many other people they don't always know, but it reminds them of a place that they've been in. And so there's this interesting relationship that happens because there's a familiarity with these spaces that we're creating, whether it's conscious or not. And by sometimes pulling those elements out that I notice, it just somehow other people notice it as well. So it's this interesting journey and relationship about talking about our city spaces that we maybe don't always notice until you pull these elements out and present them in a way that people can see them in perhaps a way that they're not used to. One of my big influences was deadpan photography, which is a style of photography that creates a little bit of a distance for the viewer, with the idea being that it's a straightforward shot, no embellishments, it's not meant to look artistic, but by doing it in the straightforward way, it allows a viewer to see a scene that maybe they see all the time, but it's seen in a different context and without a strong emotional connection. They might notice things that they didn't before. So that was some of the ideas behind the drawings that I did. And from the smaller drawings, that's when I started to work larger, because I wanted to try what happens when I work with different mediums. And these are charcoal, Conte, chalk and chalk pastel. And this is Stonehenge paper. It just takes the mediums really, really well. And I did do them in portrait very deliberately because I see them as portraits of the spaces. And a lot of these are areas that I spend a lot of time in. So this is perhaps the view when I'm waiting for a bus in the morning. And different days and different times and just that feel of these spaces. But this could also be a lot of people's spaces that they're experiencing at any one time. So it's been interesting to sort of work with them in different formats and sizes. And I get to know the spaces in a different way. One of the interesting things that happens is I now move through all these spaces differently because of this. So I'm always noticing things. And I'm developing a relationship with it. So although I had a relationship before, it was perhaps an unconscious relationship. And now I pay a lot more attention to the world around me. And I notice the little changes that happen, which you only really do once you spend a lot of time with something. And so this has been a great way to really change how I move through the world.